Hello and welcome to the program. This is another podcast for The Diplomat, and with me is Ross Milosevic, who is an extremely well-experienced security veteran around Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa. He's worked everywhere and he's seen a lot. Now, Ross was been quite active in Myanmar over the years, and he has a lot to say about what's happening there now. Ross, welcome to the program.
No, nice to be here.
When the February 1 coup was initiated, you were the first one, I think, that I interviewed about what the military had done. And your observations were quite extraordinary, particularly in the way Tatmadaw, it's a game changer, and what's happening around the region. How do you think things have unfolded since the coup, and where do you think we're going next?
Well, Luke, I wasn't surprised at all from the February 1 coup takeover by the Tatmadaw, but where we're going is very, very delicate, to say the least, as we're seeing from the happenings and goings-on within Rangoon itself, or Yangon, as it's better known. We're seeing the young people, the young generation that are coming through in their teens and early 20s and mid-20s, are putting up a fight, and they are realising the freedoms that they've lost.
Right.
And when I was there back in 2015 during the first election, when Aung San Suu Kyi and her NLP party was given the reins, I could see a definite uneasy feeling within the Tatmadaw, obviously because they had changed the constitution, allowing, a third of the parliament sitting within their parliament being military. They still had a large say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I believe over the last 5-6 years that they have become much more worried about their hold on power, and I wasn't surprised what took place on the 1st of February. And I truly believe that we're on a very delicate road to a different Myanmar, or Burma, whatever you like to call it.
It has transformed into a civil war. I don't think anybody doubts that now, and regardless of the sins of Aung San Suu Kyi, she remains immensely popular, and the military seems totally delusional about that popularity. And everything they've tried since the initial elections, or before that, going back 7 or 8 years, would indicate that they have no idea about the general feeling of the population.
No, well, that doesn't really matter to them, Luke. It's control, and they're realising that they've lost that control, and they will do what they've done in both 1988 in the mid-90s, and they will direct force where required, and they have no remorse whatsoever. And they need to keep that control within the boundaries of what they want. And to me, I've always said it, Luke, and I'll say it out loud, that they are a mafia. Right. They control large portions of business interests right across the country within the oil and gas, the telecommunications, industry, mining, logging, etc., etc., etc. And this has gone on for so long now that I think the young people within Myanmar have realised that they are dealing with not a military but a business organisation that has become a mafia itself.
How would you rate the military as a military when you compare them with other armies around the region?
Well, Luke, it's an interesting question, because that's been posed to me a few times, and I actually put it alongside of what the Iraqi army was under Saddam.
Sure.
They have a number of units, a number of battalions that are professional, but the rest are conscript.
Right.
And they are a young entity. And I really feel if there was enough pressure put on them by the ethnic organisations and militaries and militias, that they would fold rather quickly, like Saddam's did. But there's a lot of different scenarios that need to be put in place for that to really happen.
Right. I was looking at the numbers this morning, and you have the National Unity Government and the People's Defence Force, which seems to be pulling in all these different ethnic militias that have existed for years. And I think this goes to the point of a civil war, in that there's been a high tolerance of conflict and insurgencies within Myanmar over the decades. But this now looks like they are getting together, they are getting organised. I think the numbers are 79,000 in terms of when you add all the militias together, and there's like 325 odd thousand people in Tatmadaw. So the numbers favour the military, but once you start taking out that section which are not really professional soldiers and are in it for the money, and then when you
Correct.
look at where the military has to go in order to assert its control, one starts to wonder about their capabilities in a real combat military situation, that is.
Yep, absolutely. Look, I totally agree with you. And that could be formed, I've said it for many, many years, since 2011, that I could see from my research and moving around within Myanmar through Shan State, Karen State, Mon State, Arakan, the Rakhine State, that there is a lot of people that really would like to see a formation of some form of ethnic army that could, put pressure on the Tatmadaw to bring about total change. But that, again, has been a very difficult situation to bring about, because over the decades, as you've said, the Tatmadaw have been very, very good at divide and conquer strategy, and they will pay off and they will give concessions to certain ethnic groups like the Wa, sometimes to the Kachin, sometimes to the Karen, and they start to go on religious terms, especially with the Karen, because one portion of the population is Christian and the other population is Buddhist. Now, they really take advantage of those situations and divide them. And, there's no cohesion within the ethnic groups, because they're all, got their own agendas and their own interests and so forth. But if the day came that, and this is where the young people and young generation seem to be trying to move towards bringing about some formulation of an alliance, more like a NATO alliance, and if there's some sort of agreement could be put in place within the ethnic groups to join forces and go after the Tatmadaw, I think a lot of the Burman that are living and within the Tatmadaw would just change sides.
Right.
And this is where it could get very ugly, and a lot of bloodshed could be put in place. But then on the other hand, it could all fold very quickly, like it did in Iraq, and people just left the Tatmadaw ranks and then moved over to this new organisation called NUG, or the Disobedience Organisation, or to the ethnic tribes themselves. So there's a lot of ifs and buts.
Yeah.
But this could come about if they had some form of support from the international community, if a no-fly zone could be put in place by Western countries, like they did in Kosovo. But,
that's where I was going to go next, actually. I mean, I do remember in Iraq when we were approaching Baghdad and expecting a big fight near Al-Qud with the Revolutionary Guard, and they didn't front. The term was they melted away. They basically just took off their uniforms and went home. And no, where are they? And I'm not sure if that can happen in Myanmar, but one would suspect it's always possible. In regards to the international community and what you were saying about the no-fly zone, now, sanctions have been introduced. I personally approve of sanctions. A lot of people don't. I think they do work. I think they have to be part of a package. But what else could be done? Would it be possible to set up safe havens near the beaches, near a port? Is it possible to find transitory routes to get people out of there? Where does the Thai military sit in all this? It looks like they're doing a deal with Tatmadaw, but not saying what. And ASEAN seems to be, I shouldn't say this, but it's a hell of a joke when it came to that meeting they had a couple of weeks ago and came out and announced the military is going to end its brutality, and it hasn't. And it just goes on. And I agree with you. I think we're in for a long-running civil war. And one of the big issues, of course, is that Burma sits on part of China's southern flank, and the Chinese really don't want foreign forces in a country which it considers a neighbour. What else can the international community do?
I think you're spot on. I mean, I'm a great believer in sanctions. They do build momentum in certain ways as long as they're utilised and put in force by a large majority of the UN contingent. But at the same time, when you've got organisations like ASEAN that really don't like to interfere with independent states within ASEAN, it becomes very, it's all talk and no action. And this to me seems to be also within our international and Western allies, including the United States, UK, the EU, Australia.
Five Eyes.
Yes, because Myanmar sits right on the Chinese border and has been very influential over the last 20 years. There is a reluctance from the West in interfering or doing anything that would cause an international incident, especially a no-fly zone of that sort. But when you start seeing formal, official airstrikes on villages, this to me is more. It becomes a civil war, as you said, but it's also to me a sign that the country is going into a very awful situation where innocents are being killed on a daily basis, and that is happening.
Right.
And if there is no action,
I'm also thinking of the obstacles. I was speaking to a senior military source in India a few weeks ago, and he was adamant that India, we support the military. India will not intervene, and the reason why is because India has all the servicing contracts for the MiGs and for the weaponry.
Correct.
The fleets of military aircraft which are made in Russia and serviced in India, and they make a lot of money out of this, and he made no bones about it that India will support Tatmadaw. And that kind of throws a spanner in the works when you're looking at a reorganisation or changing dynamics across the region, particularly in regards to China, where you have India, Australia, Japan, the US under the Quads alliance climbing into bed together to set up some kind of naval alliance to curtail Chinese expansion in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So I'm kind of leaning towards is that the Indians are going to be torn over the Myanmar issue, and it's going to put other countries in the back seat in regards to what can be done next.
Absolutely right. Look, and that also goes to the Thais as well, because the Thais have a large trading with Myanmar.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they also don't want to rock the boat. You're spot on about India. They also provide large amounts of munitions to the Myanmar military in the form of artillery shells, missiles for their jets and helicopter gunship.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously these are the factors that they don't want to lose these contracts because they are big money. And they know that the Myanmar military, the junta, control a lot of the businesses within Myanmar, which they get their money from their mining, exporting of jade to China, etc., etc., etc. So I see both India and Thailand are allies of the West and have been for many, many years. So there's the other geopolitical aspect of not going into an area like Myanmar to put some type of force upon them, the Myanmar military, to stop their actions against innocent civilians and the protesters and so forth.
Right.
So we've got a very unfortunate situation on our hands.
Okay, and the five generals who head Tatmadaw, they're also wanted by the United Nations, or they're certainly being investigated. I'm not sure where the legal process is at the moment, kind of in limbo after Gambia brought the case for genocide against the Rohingya. But they were found responsible, and they are wanted within the international system, which is kind of difficult to describe. As someone once said to me, international law, there is no international law. It's just how do you use laws to negotiate through the international system. But is there anything the UN could do, particularly in regards to the alleged crimes committed against the Rohingya by these generals?
I've looked at this on many occasions. I've been in contact with the Gambian government in their relation to their international criminal court action against the Myanmar government and military.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me there's a lack of real determination to put anything in place. I believe that the Interpol should get involved, the International Police Organisation, and if any of these generals leave the country in any form, there should be pressure on countries to arrest these guys and send them straight to The Hague or to the International Criminal Court itself. So, but whether these actions can be done, most of these generals are either going to China, Thailand, and I think the Thais could do a lot more, to tell you the truth.
Right.
But again, there's a lot of geopolitical backdoor handshakes that have been performed in this region for so many, as you know, Luke. Southeast Asia is full of backdoor handshakes and payoffs that can be done in private, and the international community is none the wiser.
Sure. What's said publicly and what actually happens behind closed doors are two different things.
Absolutely.
I'm also thinking of the Magnitsky Act, the act that was introduced by the United States, which allows them to pursue individuals, particularly in questionable regimes. There's been generals who have been pursued in Cambodia and elsewhere in terms of targeting sanctions. So their bank accounts get frozen, they're not allowed to travel. Obviously, you can't get a visa to the United States. Do you think there's greater scope for that in Myanmar? And not just for the 5 generals. They all have subordinates, they have families. A lot of their kids want to, while dad's screwing around with their home country, their kids want to study in America or Australia in the West. Where else can we go with legislation like the Magnitsky Act? Pardon me.
That's okay. No, I think it's a great angle to look at, and I know for a fact that there is a lot of generals' family children that are studying overseas, both in the UK, America, and Australia even. And I think that can be utilised in a way that these siblings can be also sent back to their home countries, not allowed to study, bank accounts, of course, frozen, international bank account, but it's finding the forensics of those accounts that need to be looked at, and it's a job that would have to go to Interpol or some formal investigative organisation.
Sure, that would bring in
the prowess.
Yeah, and that would bring in the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, the feds
Correct.
in New York. It would involve a kind of a network, a web of top-end bankers and authorities to get their act together.
Well, I think that can be done, Luke, very much from the FBI. I know the intelligence agencies and the community within the Five Eyes Alliance can do that very easily. But it's having the formal action proved by governments, our Western governments, to put these actions into place. And there doesn't seem to be a real urgency, or it's sort of like, let's wait and see what happens. And this is where I believe the young generation of Myanmar in Burma, and the Burman themselves, not the ethnics, but the Burman, need to really start to roll with the ethnics and join forces. And that pressure, I feel, would then see outside action coming to help and support.
Right.
Because I think the Western countries are very now dubious of going into situations like Myanmar, where tyrannical governments and juntas like the Tatmadaw are now trying to put in place their own formal, governance. And I believe that in the future, within months, hopefully, or towards the start of the dry season, I think we're going to see some real action take place, because now we're going into the wet season, into the monsoon season in Southeast Asia. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of action on the ground.
Well, that was the way it used to work in Cambodia too, is that the monsoon would set in and everybody would sit in their hammocks and tents getting rained on for a long, long time. And then once the dry season emerged, so did the offensive. And you use the off-season basically to rearm, reload and get your men in order.
That's spot on, Luke. And I've seen it too many times within Burma, researching, how the Kachin Independence Army, the KIA, the different Shan entities, the militias operate, and the Karen, of course. It's a continual revolution of the same strategy every year. But I really feel there's a real drive within the Burman community, within the younger generation, that are starting to really push for some formal change, both within the governance and maybe the change of constitution, but they just need numbers.
Right.
The more numbers that are put together, and they do join forces with the ethnics, and then the ethnics start to implement some form of, like a NATO alliance. I'd call ETO, the ethnic, like an ethnic treaty between all the ethnics to join forces and really take the fight to the Tatmadaw. And I really feel if that did happen, along with all the organisations that are running in Yangon, Mandalay, and those young people that are joining forces with the different ethnic groups, I think this could be over very quickly if that took place.
Right, and one of the big changes that's occurred over the last 10 years is social media. Now, going back to the 90s, 2000s, 2000, a little bit into 2010, I'd been to Myanmar a few times, and it was always shrouded in secrecy. You didn't know what was going on, even when you were there, except that you were being followed and harassed. But it was really difficult to prove what we were hearing in the outside world. These days, I have a feed coming through from some of the operators in Burma. I'm certainly not the only one that gets it. It's not. I'm privy to it, but it's going to a lot of people. Now I'm getting 300 items sent to me a day on the atrocities that are being committed, and it's there for everyone to see. It's evidence for a potential war crimes tribunal going forward, and I think this is also important in terms of winning the sympathies of people in the West, not so much the governments, but the people, because what we're saying, I think, is that to get governments to react, and we know that governments don't like to be unpopular, and they don't like to get involved in conflicts where, it's hard to see an end, and more importantly, it's difficult to win public sympathy. But it's there for everybody to see.
Very much so, very much so. It's funny you should mention this, Lee, because when I was working a 6-month contract for a large telecommunications provider to Telenor, which is one of the bigger telecom providers in Myanmar, they were setting up all their antenna stations right across Myanmar and implementing the services and the generation of phone membership and SIM card membership was incredible.
Right.
We're talking, very poor people in villages within, the outer ethnic states. Everyone had a phone. Everybody was, getting on board with social media, the Facebook, the Instagram,
right,
et cetera, and this is where I think the Tatmadaw has lost focus and this is why they've shut down in Rakhine State. It was one of the longest internet shutdowns in history around the world.
Yep.
Because they realised during the Rohingya genocide that too much news was getting out, too much evidence against them, and it was entirely embarrassing for them. So this is where they have fallen short, and they've had a lot of blowback through social media, and that is generating a much-needed support right across the world. But again, are they getting the support they really need and require to push back the Tatmadaw and bring about change and allowing a free and fair government that's won an election, the NLD, right, and Aung San Suu Kyi to be released to bring about a government that's been installed. But I don't see that happening, Luke. I really don't.
Well, when you're talking about support, I presume you're meaning weapons, arms, training, medical units, all the types of what you need to take into battle. They need to have.
Well, that's one side, but you've also got to have the political side. I think in any civil uprising, you've got to have both sides of the coin. You've got to have your political side. You've also got to have your military side. And with those two working together in a proper strategy, but implementing the methodologies both on the ground through the military side, but also back in the desks and offices of the political side, moving in one direction. But unfortunately, we have too many directions, and there's no coordination. There's no real large base strategy. It's very ad hoc in the way they're doing things, and they need some form of leadership. And I think through the Western intelligence agencies, etc., there could be more support and effort put in place to go in there as a Lawrence of Arabia did and get the tribes to join forces together and bring about some formulation and strategy to really change the whole aspect of the political system within Myanmar and see peace be reinstated in a proper government.
Okay, now we had 4 years of Donald Trump, who really dismissed US foreign policy, their agenda across Southeast Asia during his time in office, and there were a lot of positions left vacant. There were just so many things that didn't happen that Joe Biden, who was inaugurated, January 20, and the coup happened 11 days later, would appear he's definitely trying to reassert US foreign policy in the region, but I would imagine that the coup in Myanmar perhaps didn't take everybody by surprise, but it wasn't exactly what the Americans needed when they're just starting out on this venture. Do you think there'll be a greater role, and will they play a greater role in the months to come?
Oh, that's a hard one, Luke, to answer, because it's such a young administration at the moment. Yes, Mr. Biden has got a lot of experience with foreign policy and his years in the US government, but he's a very, in my eyes, a slow thinker. I think he will just let things play out. His advisors around him will be saying that this could be a very similar situation to Syria, having so many different organisations, ethnic groups. It could be very messy. So I think there will be a much sit back and wait and see sort of approach. Yes, they'll put in place these sanctions, which they have, which is very good. But I don't think we will see any direct intervention or some form of, backdoor support for any of the ethnic groups, or even the young Burman that are changing sides and fighting against the Tatmadaw. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next few months.
Right. You mentioned Syria, and it kind of reminded me of some contacts I had there, particularly in the Free Syrian Army, and how a lot of people really got their fingers burnt on that one.
Mm-hmm. And that could be very similar to what may happen in Myanmar. And this is why, there has been a reluctance from a lot of Western countries to get involved in these types of situations. And we have seen the experience of Syria being very prominent. So I think countries like India, Thailand, who are against getting involved also because of trade relations or of some form, but even Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States and UK, they're all very quiet, and it's too quiet for my liking, because there seems to be maybe some backdoor intelligence being provided to these Western countries, and to then say, well, we can't do too much because it's on the back step of China, and we don't want to push things too far, and it could change and revolve into something more than what we bargained for.
Right. Okay, it's a grim future for Myanmar at the moment. Ross Milosevic, thank you very much for your time. It's been a great chat.
My pleasure, Luke. It's great to hear from you. Thanks again.
Cheers, mate.